Scary telling. I was having a pleasant dream when what sounded like hammering woke me. It was a sharp, metallic sound that echoed through my ears, slowly jolting me awake. At first, I thought it was coming from the construction site down the street. But as the sound grew louder, I realized it was coming from directly above me. I tried to move, but I couldn't. Something was pressing down on me, holding me in place. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped. I frantically tried to call for help, but my voice was barely audible, muffled by the thick layer of dirt that surrounded me. I started to hyperventilate as I realized what had happened. I had been buried alive. How long had I been down here? How much air did I have left? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the hammering, which was now accompanied by the unmistakable sound of shovels digging into the earth. Tears streamed down my face as I realized there was nothing I could do. I was trapped, buried alive, and no one was coming to save me. I felt a wave of hopelessness wash over me, followed by a deep sense of despair. As the digging grew louder, I felt myself slipping away. The lack of air was starting to take its toll, and I knew I didn't have much time left. I closed my eyes and prayed for a miracle. And then, everything went quiet. I could hear the muffled sounds of footsteps above me, but the digging had stopped. For a moment, I held my breath, hoping against hope that someone had heard me and was coming to my rescue. But then, I heard the sound of shovels being piled onto a truck. The footsteps grew fainter, and soon, there was nothing but silence. I was alone, buried alive, with no hope of escape. Hours turned into days, and I lost all track of time. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my thoughts consumed by the possibility of being rescued. But with each passing day, that hope dwindled, replaced by a growing sense of dread. I began to see things in the darkness, hallucinations brought on by the lack of air and water. I saw faces peering at me through the dirt, twisted and contorted in agony. I heard voices whispering in the darkness, telling me that there was no escape, that I was doomed to spend the rest of eternity buried beneath the earth. And then, just when I thought all was lost, I heard a sound. It was faint at first, barely audible above the sound of my own labored breathing. But as it grew louder, I realized it was the sound of a rescue team. Tears streamed down my face as I heard the sound of shovels digging through the earth. They were here, finally here to save me. I felt a surge of hope, followed by a deep sense of gratitude. As they pulled me out of the earth, I felt the sun on my face for the first time in what felt like an eternity. I looked up at my rescuers, tears streaming down my face. They had saved my life, and for that, I was forever grateful. But as they helped me to my feet, I felt a sense of unease. Something was wrong. I looked around, trying to figure out what it was, when I saw it. The grave next to mine was empty. The dirt had been disturbed, as if someone had dug their way out. And then, I heard the sound of shovels digging in the distance. I knew then that my ordeal was far from over. I was no longer buried alive, but I was still in grave danger. Something had unearthed that grave, and I had a feeling that it wasn't human. I tried to warn the rescue team, but they brushed it off as the result of my ordeal. But as we made our way back to civilization, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following us. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of my ordeal began to fade. But I never forgot about the empty grave, or the feeling of unease that had followed me since my rescue. And then, one night, I heard that same metallic hammering sound. It was faint at first, but it grew louder and louder until it was all I could hear. I knew then that whatever had unearthed that grave was back, and it was coming for me. I tried to run, but it was no use. The creature was too fast, too powerful. It caught me, and I felt its cold, clammy hands wrap around my throat. As I gasped for air, I saw its face. It was twisted and contorted, just like the faces I had seen in my hallucinations. And then, everything went dark. When I woke up, I was back in the grave. The creature was gone, but I knew it would be back. And this time, I wouldn't be so lucky. I was buried alive once again, with no hope of escape. And as I felt the dirt start to cover me once again, I knew that this time, there would be no rescue. I couldn't believe my luck when I found the old, tattered lamp at the flea market. The genie that emerged from it granted me 3 wishes, and I had already used 2 of them. The first was to become rich and successful, and the second was to marry the love of my life. But for my third and final wish, I knew exactly what I wanted. I had lost my father to cancer when I was just a teenager, and it had devastated me. Over the years, I had grown bitter and resentful towards the universe for taking him away from me. So when I found the lamp, I knew exactly what I wanted my last wish to be. I wanted my dad to be alive again. I climbed up to the top of the hill where his grave was located. It was dark and misty, and the only sounds were the rustling of the leaves and the distant hooting of an owl. I placed the lamp on the ground and whispered my wish into the air. Suddenly, the ground began to shake. I stumbled backwards as the earth split open, revealing a gaping black hole. A figure emerged from the darkness, shrouded in mist and shadows. It was my father. At first, I was overjoyed. I threw my arms around him and buried my face in his chest. But then I noticed something strange. His skin was cold and clammy, and his eyes were empty and hollow. His lips twisted into a grotesque smile, and I realized that something was horribly wrong. "Dad, what's happening?" I asked, pulling away from him. But he didn't answer. He just stared at me with those empty eyes and that twisted grin. I tried to back away, but he grabbed me with a strength that belied his skeletal frame. His fingers dug into my flesh, and I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Suddenly, I realized what was happening. This wasn't my dad. This was something else, something evil. The genie had twisted my wish and brought my father back as a monster. I struggled against his grip, but he was too strong. He dragged me towards the open grave, his bony fingers tightening around my neck. I gasped for air, but it was like trying to breathe underwater. I was going to die, and there was nothing I could do about it. But then, a glimmer of hope. The lamp. I remembered the lamp. With my last bit of strength, I reached out and grabbed it. I rubbed it frantically, hoping that the genie would appear and save me. And he did. The genie emerged from the lamp, his eyes blazing with fury. He saw what had happened and realized that he had gone too far. He spoke a few words in a language I couldn't understand, and my father's grip loosened. I fell to the ground, gasping for breath. When I looked up, my father was gone. The genie was standing in front of me, his arms crossed. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean for it to turn out like this. I can't bring your father back to life. Nobody can. Death is a natural part of life, and it's something that we all have to face eventually." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. I had learned my lesson. You can't cheat death, and you shouldn't try. I had made a terrible mistake, and I had paid the price for it. As the genie disappeared back into the lamp, I took one last look at my father's grave. I knew that I would never see him again, but I also knew that he would always be with me in spirit. And I realized that that was enough. It was a typical Tuesday evening when I discovered the picture in my phone. I had just finished a long day at work and was looking forward to a relaxing night at home. But when I unlocked my phone, I saw a picture that made my blood run cold. It was a picture of me sleeping, and I lived alone. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. How had someone taken a picture of me without me knowing? I checked all the doors and windows to make sure they were locked, but everything was secure. I tried to brush it off as a mistake. Maybe I accidentally took the picture and didn't remember. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that wasn't possible. Days turned into weeks, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I started sleeping with the lights on and checking my phone constantly, but the picture never appeared again. That's when the strange things started happening. I would come home from work to find my furniture rearranged or my belongings moved around. I would hear footsteps in the hallway at night, but when I checked, there was no one there. I started feeling like I was going crazy, like I was being gaslit by an unknown entity. One night, I woke up to find a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was dark and shadowy, with glowing eyes that seemed to stare right through me. I tried to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. The figure disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me shaking and terrified. That's when I knew I needed help. I called the police and told them everything that had been happening. They searched my apartment, but found nothing. They told me it was probably just my imagination, but I knew that wasn't true. Weeks turned into months, and the strange occurrences continued. I started seeing the figure more and more often, and it seemed to be getting closer every time. I tried to move out of my apartment, but no one would take me in. I was trapped, alone, and terrified. One night, I woke up to find the figure standing right next to my bed. This time, it spoke. Its voice was cold and raspy, like it hadn't spoken in centuries. "I've been watching you," it said. "You're mine now." I tried to scream, but the figure reached out and touched me, sending me into a deep sleep. When I woke up, I was in a dark, damp room. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and I could hear the sound of dripping water in the distance. I tried to stand up, but my hands and feet were tied. I was a prisoner. Days turned into weeks, and I lost track of time. I was fed only enough to survive, and I could feel myself getting weaker every day. But the worst part was the figure, who visited me every night. It would whisper in my ear, telling me things that I couldn't understand. Finally, I was rescued by the police. They had found a secret room in my apartment that led to an underground tunnel system. It was there that they found me, barely alive and on the brink of death. The investigation revealed that the figure had been a stalker, someone who had been watching me for years. They had taken the picture of me sleeping and had been breaking into my apartment for months, rearranging my furniture and moving my belongings. The figure had planned to keep me as their prisoner forever, but thankfully, I was rescued in time. I never found out who the stalker was, but the memory of their cold, raspy voice still haunts me to this day. I had always been fascinated by the supernatural, and my curiosity had led me to join a group of like-minded individuals who shared my interest in the paranormal. We spent our weekends exploring abandoned buildings and investigating haunted locations, always searching for proof of the existence of ghosts and otherworldly entities. One day, we received a tip about an old man who claimed to have the ability to ward off evil spirits. Intrigued, we decided to pay him a visit. When we arrived at his remote cabin, the old man welcomed us inside and began to tell us his story. He had grown up in a family of witch doctors and had learned the ways of the supernatural from a young age. He had spent his life researching and practicing various rituals and spells and had amassed a vast knowledge of the occult. He told us about a particular ritual that he had used to keep evil spirits at bay. It involved creating a line of sea salt around a property, which acted as a barrier to keep out any unwanted entities. We were skeptical, but the old man seemed sincere, and he even offered to perform the ritual for us. He took us outside and showed us how to create the line of sea salt, warning us to be careful not to break it. We spent the night in his cabin, feeling safe and secure behind the line of salt. But as the night wore on, we began to hear strange noises coming from outside. At first, we thought it was just the wind, but the sounds grew louder and more distinct. We peered out the windows, but all we could see was darkness. The old man assured us that the sea salt was doing its job, but we couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching us from beyond the line. As the night wore on, the noises grew louder and more persistent. We huddled together in fear, trying to ignore the sounds of scratching and tapping at the windows. But then, something crossed the line of sea salt. We heard a faint hissing sound, and then a low growl. The old man's face turned pale, and he muttered a curse under his breath. We all knew we had to get out of there. But as we made our way towards the door, we heard a voice whispering in our ears. It was a low, guttural voice, speaking in a language we couldn't understand. We ran out of the cabin and into the darkness, feeling as though we were being chased by something unseen. We could hear the sound of footsteps behind us, and we knew that we were in grave danger. As we stumbled through the forest, we saw a figure emerge from the darkness. It was humanoid, but with twisted features and eyes that glowed red in the moonlight. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. We ran faster, but the creature was gaining on us. We could feel its breath on our necks, and we knew that we were running out of time. And then, just as we thought it was all over, we stumbled upon a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a small pond, and around the pond was a circle of sea salt. We ran towards the circle, feeling the creature's hot breath on our necks. But as soon as we crossed the line of salt, the creature disappeared. It was as though we had entered a different world, a world where the sea salt had the power to banish evil. We collapsed on the ground, gasping for air, and we knew that we had narrowly escaped death. From that day on, we always carried a bag of sea salt with us, knowing that it was our only defense against the supernatural. I've always been a happy-go-lucky person, but lately, I've been feeling down. Nothing seems to cheer me up, not even my favorite things. My therapist suggested that I try practicing smiling in front of a mirror. She said that it helps trick the brain into feeling happier. I thought it was a silly suggestion, but I figured I'd give it a try. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, and I forced myself to smile. It felt strange at first, but soon I was grinning ear to ear. I held the smile for a few seconds before letting it fade away. I looked back at my reflection, and to my surprise, it was still grinning. I blinked a few times, thinking that maybe it was just a trick of the light, but it wasn't. I frowned, and my reflection frowned back. I smiled, and it smiled back. I tried to move my face in different ways, but my reflection matched every expression perfectly. It was almost as if it was alive, like it was a separate being from me. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. I knew it was ridiculous to think that my reflection was anything more than a reflection. But the longer I stared at it, the more convinced I became that it was alive. It was almost like it was mocking me, like it knew something I didn't. I tried to shake the feeling and went about my day, but I couldn't stop thinking about my smiling reflection. The next day, I woke up early and went straight to the bathroom. I stood in front of the mirror and forced myself to smile, and my reflection matched my expression. But then, something strange happened. My reflection's smile began to grow wider and wider until it was almost unnaturally large. It was so wide that I could see the back of its throat, and I could almost hear a soft, chilling laughter. I stepped back, feeling a cold sweat start to form on my skin. My reflection continued to smile wider and wider until it was almost grotesque. It was almost as if it was trying to escape from the mirror and take over my body. I screamed, and the reflection's smile disappeared, replaced by a look of fury. I stumbled backward, and the mirror cracked. The reflection vanished, and I was left staring at my terrified face in the shattered glass. I've avoided mirrors ever since that day. I don't know what would have happened if I had continued to smile in front of the mirror, but I know that it wouldn't have been good. It's almost as if my reflection wanted to consume me, to take over my body and make it its own. So, I've learned my lesson. Smiling in front of the mirror may make you feel happier, but it's not worth the risk. You never know what's staring back at you.